Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into the secret origin story of one of the world's greatest civilizations. We're going way back, before the famous pharaohs and the Great Pyramids, to explore the 2,000-year prequel that shows us how it all really got started. You know, when we think of ancient Egypt, we picture the big stuff, right? The towering pyramids, the golden masks of pharaohs like Tutankhamun. But that was the civilization at its peak. Long before any of that existed, there was this formative era, a time when the whole idea of Egypt was just being pieced together from scattered tribes living along a river. And that era has a name, the Predynastic period. This is our answer. It's a huge 2,000-year story that literally laid the foundation. We're talking politics, culture, technology, for everything we now associate with ancient Egypt. Okay, so let's dive into this. So our story doesn't begin with kings or crowns or grand monuments. Nope, it starts with something much more fundamental: massive climate change and a single river that brought life to a barren desert. So picture this. The Sahara region, which was once pretty green, starts to dry up and become the massive desert we know today. This basically pushed people towards the only reliable source of life for hundreds of miles, the Nile. And the Nile wasn't just a source of water. Its annual floods were super predictable, and they deposited this rich, fertile soil, creating this thin, green ribbon of paradise that was just perfect for farming and, as it turns out, for travel. Now, this transformation from scattered groups of people to a settled society, well, it didn't happen overnight. It was a really slow, gradual process that took about 2 millennia, and it unfolded across several distinct cultural phases that archaeologists have since identified, with each one building on the last. And you can literally see society getting more and more complex over time right here. It all starts with the Badarian culture. We're talking simple farming, basic pottery. But then, as you move into the Naqada periods, you start to see more advanced stuff like painted pottery, long-distance trade, and, this is key, the beginnings of a social hierarchy. Then, by Naqada III, boom, you have the rise of actual kings and huge settlements. So as these settlements grew bigger, richer, and more powerful, a central conflict started to brew. It was a conflict that would define the whole era, a struggle for control between two distinct powers that had formed along the Nile. So, for centuries, Egypt was literally split in two. In the south, you had Upper Egypt, which was based in the narrow Nile Valley. Its king wore that tall white crown you see. Then up in the north, you had Lower Egypt, controlling the super fertile Nile Delta, and its king wore that distinctive red crown. 2 lands, 2 crowns, 2 competing powers. So what began as a land with dozens of small, independent towns had slowly, through conflict and alliances, turned into a massive winner-take-all competition. The powerful rulers of both Upper and Lower Egypt started conquering their neighbors, setting the stage for one final showdown to control the entire Nile. But here's the thing. To conquer and actually control a kingdom, you need way more than just a strong army. To manage this growing, complex world, these early Egyptians had to invent the very tools of civilization itself. And this is a really crucial point. Leadership itself transformed into something sacred. The king wasn't just a tribal chief anymore. He became a divine force, the person responsible for protecting cosmic order, which they called Ma'at. He was the one and only link between the gods and the people. This single idea would go on to define the pharaoh for the next 3,000 years. Of course, with all that divine power, you need some earthly management to back it up. You can't run a kingdom without organization, right? So this led to some of the world's first administrative systems. They set up organized regions, created tax collection systems for grain and livestock, and built centralized warehouses to store all that wealth. And what's so cool is this shows us the really practical origins of writing. The first hieroglyphs weren't for writing poetry or history. They started as simple marks on pottery just to show who owned what. Then they became labels for trade goods. It was only after centuries of practical use that they evolved into that amazing system of pictures and sounds that we know today. Okay, so all the pieces are on the board now. You've got divine kingship, a working bureaucracy, and a writing system. With all these tools of power in place, one kingdom, Upper Egypt, finally gained the upper hand. And that led to the huge climactic moment this whole story has been building towards. So, for a long time, historians had clues, right? They had myths and little fragments of evidence that suggested some great unification happened. But was there one single piece of physical proof that could show, beyond any doubt, that the two lands were forged into one? Well, yeah, there was. The proof we were all looking for came not from some dusty scroll, but from this incredible artifact that was dug up at Hierakonpolis, that ancient capital of Upper Egypt we talked about earlier. And this is it, the Narmer palette. It's basically the smoking gun. It's this ceremonial stone slab that tells a whole story in pictures. On one side, you see King Narmer, and he's wearing the white crown of the south, totally victorious over his enemies. And then, get this, on the other side you see him marching in victory, but now he's wearing the red crown of the north. It is the first time in history we see one ruler wearing both crowns. It's the symbolic birth of a united Egypt. So, after all that, why does this 2,000-year prequel actually matter? Well, because it didn't just end with one king's victory. It created the indestructible blueprint for the next 3,000 years of Egyptian history. When you really think about it, every major thing we associate with ancient Egypt, the divine pharaoh, those mesmerizing hieroglyphs, the powerful, unified state, it was all created during this formative period. They didn't just build a kingdom, they forged the very DNA of a civilization. And that leaves us with a pretty powerful thought, doesn't it? The slow, deliberate, often invisible work of one era becomes the unquestioned foundation of the next. The ancient Egyptians built a foundation so strong it lasted for 3 millennia, which kind of makes you wonder, what foundations are we building right now? Thanks for joining this explainer.